I'd like to call the September 7th Des Moines City Council study session to order. And at this time, I'm going to ask State Representative Orwell to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Pennington and Councilmember Musser are absent tonight. Is there a motion to excuse them?
So moved.
Second.
You guys did get it together. So the motion was made by Councilmember Nutting, seconded by, I'll go to Councilmember Bangs. All those in favor, please raise your right hand, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Okay. At this point, we will now take comments from the public, but no one has signed up. So is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us over items that are specifically on the agenda tonight that didn't get a chance to speak up or sign up? Sorry. Seeing no one approach, I will take us forward to our discussion items. We will begin with our legislative update, and that's Representative Tina Orwell. It's got to be green. There you go.
Excellent. Well, good evening. I'm Tina Orwell, and I have the honor of representing the 33rd Legislative District. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I was hoping to maybe spend about 10 minutes giving you some highlights of the last legislative session and talk a little bit about next session, and then if you have questions, would be happy to answer that. That sounds okay. I don't know how to use your thing, but we'll try it. I want to first say thank you. So I live on the intersection at the end of 240th, and I want to thank the council and the Des Moines staff for really stepping in and pretty rapidly helping that intersection. 2 years ago, a friend of my daughter's got in a wreck there. There has been numerous wrecks of different cars. It's very difficult if you're coming up the 240th to actually have good visibility. And so how many weeks ago? Was it 2 weeks ago? 4 weeks? Oh, time flies. But anyway, I talked to a lot of my neighbors, and they were a little skeptical about the four-way stop, but I've heard really positive things that it's working. I would love to hear from the city how you think it's working, but I just want to say thank you. I know I came with a lot of our neighbors, and you guys were incredibly responsive, so thank you. So, how many bills were introduced this session? Anyone want to guess? Too many? It was a long session. Anyone want to throw out any numbers? Huh? 5,000. It was about 2,200 were introduced. Anyone want to guess how many Governor Inslee signed? Was that a negative? I want to make sure I say the right number. So he signed 366 bills, which is about 16% of the bills introduced. It was actually a fairly small number for a long session, and it was a long session. As you know, we went to the third week of July. So here's another question. What is the fastest growing airport in the country? We all know this one. Yes, SeaTac International Airport. Some of the work this year was around the impact the airport has on our community, and I think we all know, between NextGen, the fastest growing, seeing more cargo and international, that it's had an impact on our community. And so really trying to work on what are our strategies of next steps around mitigation, helping our community. Again, I want to say thank you to the City of Des Moines. You've been a partner as we're looking at this. One of the things we got through this year was an air quality study that will be done by the University of Washington. And it turns out we had expertise and we didn't know it. They have actually done some research at LAX and Atlanta on ultrafine particles and how that relates to jet fuel and the areas around airports. And so we got funding from the state, $250,000, which will allow them to look at the footprint of SeaTac for this area as it relates to those particles. Department of Commerce and Department of Health will also be involved. So as we look at what the next steps are, they can be involved. And, we met with Congressman Adam Smith. I know your mayor has been very involved in this conversation. A lot of the members hear about what do we do. And so I think the hope is we collect the data, we look at possible mitigation. Things that have already come up would be the use of biofuels. Does that help? Do you have less of these ultrafine particles? Well, we don't know. And so one of the things we asked Congressman Adam Smith is, can we have some research about the use of biofuels? And can we do some stuff at the federal level? What would it mean for our community as far as mitigation? Would it be AV systems, HEPA filters? We don't know yet, but I think we want to start the conversation, at least have some research of knowing what the footprint looks like. There was a proposal for a larger impact study. Those dollars we didn't get this session, but we'll come back in the short session and try to get the additional dollars. McCleary, that was our paramount duty. We did have some new investments, and what I would say to our community especially is, we addressed some things around teacher salary. One of the reasons that's so complex is, should a teacher in Seattle make the same as a teacher in Sequim, right? You have different cost of livings. And so they really tried to set up salary scales that seem fair. The local levies is one of the things that happens is we're going to move more of the funding to the state level. And so the local levies will be used what we're calling enrichment, and the state will be paying for basic education. What does this mean for our community? Well, one of the funding mechanisms is an increase in property taxes. What we're anticipating for this area is there would be a slight increase in property taxes the first year and actually a decrease the following 3 years. We're also seeing that it would be pretty significant new investments for like Highline, Kent, and Federal Way school districts. So they'll start out, and I have some of the numbers. The numbers are a little soft right now because the local jurisdictions need to see if they're in agreement with the numbers, but I can provide those. So an example would be for like Highline School District, the first year we got additional $7.4 million. Over time, it would increase to $38 million, and eventually would be $54 million. So we do see this is going to bring additional resources. I don't think we're done. I think those are good new investments, but I think we're going to need to make more. Public safety, a lot of things that I worked on. I need to thank, I know your police chief is here. Where is the others? Been doing great work around human trafficking, and I really appreciate your leadership. It's a huge issue for our area. We did work, I had a couple bills where I worked with the police chiefs on, so when they do stings, they have the ability to prosecute. We also had one for protection orders for victims and their families so that they can feel safe when they're trying to maybe testify against the people that have taken them into that industry. Rape kit reform is something I've been working on several years. We had 6,000 untested sexual assault kits in our state, and so we've been working to get those tested. Some of the next steps that we did this year is training for law enforcement. I work with the Criminal Justice Center in Sioux Roar, and we're going to have trauma-informed training for all of law enforcement, especially those who work on sexual assault cases will get the most training because they do that full-time. But we'll be moving forward on that. We also had $1 million gang proviso, which will be used to help on gang intervention, a gang database, and helping to look at issues around firearms and youth. So those are some of the things we did on public safety. We actually, other members also did a lot on DUIs. There was a lot of good work on driving under the influence as well. Mental health, we made new investments to Western State Hospital. I don't know if you guys realize, but it was in a crisis and it was at risk of losing significant federal funding, and so we're trying to stabilize their staffing and their dollars coming in. We're hoping that those steps will help us not be under an audit at the federal level. I do a lot of work on suicide prevention. We had a new partnership this last 2 years with the NRA and the Second Amendment. We are actually going to be doing suicide prevention awareness and training in gun stores and shooting ranges, and we start in Aberdeen on Sunday for our kickoff. And 80% of all gun deaths are suicides, and so we really needed new partners to really take this on, and really proud. There was actually an op-ed in the paper today from our co-chairs, which is Jen Stuber, who's a professor at UW, and Alan Gottlieb, who's the founder of the Second Amendment. So we're working on that. Hopefully that will have an impact. I know you guys don't care much about the capital budget. I could skip this one if you'd like. I mean, so unfortunately, one of the things we did not get done was the capital budget. There is some speculation that maybe we'll get that done before session, that we might be back in Olympia. Important investments for our area are in capital budget, and it was very difficult to leave without passing this. Obviously, there's new investments for Highline College. Actually, the House budget did get passed off the floor, which did include the money for the marina in Redondo Beach. And we had some other additional dollars, I think, for the Skills Center. So again, on the Senate side, it got passed out of their capital budget committee, but it did not get passed off the floor of the Senate, and there's issues around Hearst and water things that are being negotiated now. So again, I just think that's something we all wish could have been done, and we're still hopeful that we'll get that done soon. Next session. One of the bills I worked on with the cities was around foreclosure and abandoned properties. We're looking at protocols that would really allow cities to get properties cleaned up and cleaned up more rapidly. There was a really good squatter law, I know that was the term, but to allow law enforcement to get people out of homes that have gone into abandoned properties. So we'll be back this next session to try to get the additional work done for cities. I've been doing a lot of work on student loan debt. It's pretty staggering when you start seeing how much debt students have, and we don't have a lot of protections. So that's a unique one. The other thing is around K-12 and language access. I have a bill that I've been working on. You know, the Kent School District has 140 languages spoken. I think it's 70 for Highline. And families whose English is not their primary language often don't feel as connected for their kids, especially if there's special needs kids, the 504 and the IEPs and special planning. So we're working with the state superintendent, and we're going to try to do some best practices around interpreters and more resources to our schools in this area. Again, we'll be working on human trafficking. One of the things we're working on for next session is with the hotels and training around trafficking, and we'll have some updates on that. And on gang prevention, we actually, the governor's going to be doing a summit on gang. Are you going to be going to that, Chief? That's coming up, and we're going to attend, and we're hoping to do a collaborative, larger gang prevention bill with Yakima. We'll be teaming up and getting feedback from Chief Delgado and other police chiefs in our area about what we need to include on that. There you go.
I've got one. Tina, as you know, there's been all the conversations regarding the Port of Seattle, SeaTac Airport, have been going on for decades now. With the port in the process of adopting its master plan, it's obvious that its physical limitations are going to restrict the number of passengers that are going to be able to move in and out of that facility. Is there any opportunity there in terms of being able to have a conversation, move the conversation to beginning to look at another regional airport to be able to provide additional service? I think even the Port of Seattle commissioners are coming to the realization that that may be what happens down the line. But I think they need some impetus, and it's got to happen at all. The conversation has to happen at all levels, whether it's at the port, but we offered comments up regarding both the ground transportation and the limitations at the airport itself relative to the Washington Air Transportation Plan. So we've been taking every opportunity to kind of communicate that, but are there conversations happening among legislators regarding this?
Yes, excellent question, and a very important question. Yeah, the capacity is so limited, and we're in such a major urban area. So Senator Karen Kaiser, along with Senator Warnock, actually convened a meeting around looking at the state conducting an actual study and starting to work on potential locations for a second airport. At that meeting was Moses Lake. They have an incredible interest, especially as it comes to cargo. And obviously, the port was there, and we really want to see them as a partner in this because, you know, down the road, they're not going to have the capacity, and we're going to need to work on this as a state. So again, we got money in the budget, and I really want to highlight Senator Karen Kaiser's work on this. I kind of took the lead on the air quality, and she did on the siting of another airport. And so there is money for us to start working on that. Also, I know Payne Field, they're doing some looking at how they might be able to expand in addition to Alaska. So I think that's all good news. I think the cargo is especially important because a lot of that's in the evening and it's the older planes. And if we had the ability for another area to take that on, I think that could help our situation. But great question. I certainly can keep you in the loop around what are the next steps on that.
Lisa?
Can you tell us a little bit more about the air quality study? Are there timelines? Is there something that they've got in place at this point?
Yeah, I think the things I would highlight for you is it's going to take 18 months. They have a lot of the equipment they need, and so that's good news. There's going to be an advisory committee formed, and I'm going to be working with UW to identify who would serve on that, and I think that'll have 12 to 15 potential people serving on it. It's going to be important to have some representation from the cities, and so I'll be reaching out and community members. We'll have Department of Commerce, Department of Health, Department of Ecology. We definitely want to make sure we have the right people in that advisory group, and they'll, in addition to the advisory group, they're going to work with experts and have like a technical group that will be working about where should they be in the community. And what we've really encouraged them to do is also forums with the community so they get the feedback directly from the community. And so it will be a process, and they're really aware of that. I think I will share information around the advisory group. I would love any input people have on that. Again, we hope by the end of September to have that people identified who would serve on that.
Anyone else? You know, Tina, I'm really pleased to hear, especially when you said the state's got to, you know, kind of take the lead on moving the siting of the second airport. We've had some conversations with some folks from the Port of Seattle, and they don't see it as part of their mission, and I kind of understand that because the Port of Seattle is to operate the Port of Seattle and not to site a second airport. And so if it were to enter into their thinking, it still would be superseded by other things that they needed to work on. So I really appreciate the work that is happening at the state level.
And I just want to say thank you to yourself, Mayor, and all the council members. You know, I feel like we're partners on what are really complex issues for our community. And again, my door's always open if people want to meet and hear more about any of these or let me know what I should be working on for next session.
Thank you very much for coming to see us tonight and giving us this update. Very
Do you
valuable.
want me to stay for the capital budget piece or not? Is there anything you need on that?
So we're just gonna have Connor kind of walk through those issues that he might have that were not covered in yours. And so you're certainly welcome. That would be awesome.
Yeah,
It's
I'll
gonna
stay.
be-
If
it's
you're
gonna
able.
be- It's gonna be brief,
Okay.
right, Connor?
I'll try to keep it brief.
It's good to know what he's saying here as well as down there.
Both sides of the story. So let's see, can we, there we go. Okay, so hello, everyone. My name is Connor Edwards. I'm the legislative advocate for the city of Des Moines. I've been doing that since February 2017 when I took over for Anthony. And so I'm here tonight to give a presentation on some of the issues that we've been working on during the 2017 session. So here we go. Let's see. So we had three main issues that I'll cover here today. The first one being Senate Bill 5504 and House Bill 1801, which is something that we were trying to champion that would allow us to reduce the fiscal impact that the marina has on the city. We've had to pay money to DNR every year for the tidal lands that the marina is on, and there are certain entities, like the Port of Seattle, for instance, that are able to lease tidal lands and pay nothing for them. And so we were hoping to get similar treatment in the eyes of the law and an exemption for public marinas. We were actually joined in this effort by Oak Harbor, which is in a very similar situation to us, although their lease fees were lower. Ultimately, we didn't get a bill on this, and I'll go into that a little bit later as to why that happened. But the second issue is a brighter spot, the capital budget request. We did request money in the capital budget for the Des Moines Marina renovation, and we did get a very big chunk of money thanks to the help of our wonderful legislative delegation. And so that is definitely good news. And then the third, I'll focus on some other issues that affect Des Moines and other cities across Washington State. So go to the next slide here. And if anyone has any questions at any point, just interrupt me or hold until the end is fine. It's either way. So this is our legislative delegation. On the left, we see the 33rd district part and the 30th district, which also covers part of Des Moines. And these are the people that are really doing the heavy lifting for us in Olympia. It's not easy to accomplish what they accomplish, but these are the guys that are advocating for us within their caucuses, within committees, and on the floor of the House and the Senate, respectively. So these are the guys that are really doing the work for our area. So, as I said earlier, Senate Bill 5504 would have given us more or less equal treatment to the Port of Seattle, for instance, in what we would have to pay for the tidal lands that we're leasing for the marina. And this was co-sponsored in the House by Representative Orwell and Gregerson, in addition to the two representatives from the 10th District, which is where Oak Harbor is in. They also had a mutual interest in the bill. And Senator Karen Kaiser sponsored a version in the Senate. And so the House version actually proceeded past the Committee of Origin, which was great. The Senate version, unfortunately, while it got a hearing, it did not proceed. So we got a hearing in the House, which was fantastic, and there was some skepticism among members, but ultimately they exec the bill out of committee 9-0, which is great. But unfortunately, a lot of them who I met with, they had concerns about the fiscal impact to the state, and it was a really tight year for money. And so they weren't really willing to try to find the money elsewhere for this. And so what you saw during the committee hearings, and Michael was there, and Joe Dewsbury was there as well, was that there were two main points of opposition. First was DNR, because this bill for them would have been nothing but a hit to their budget. They would have lost, I think, several FTEs, and that was a problem for them, so they did not want to see it go forward on those grounds. And the private marinas, they believed that if Des Moines had an exemption when they didn't, that we would somehow undercut them on price and steal all their business away, or a chunk of their business. Yes,
Can you
sir.
explain that a little bit more? Why is the private marina business so concerned about what us
Yeah.
Oak Harbor was doing?
Yeah,
Does that compete with them?
they think that we would be in a better position because our costs would be lower, that they could undercut us, or that we could undercut them on costs and attract more business to our marina. And I didn't feel that was a very logical argument, because again, it's not like there's a huge discrepancy in the prices there or anything like that. And we met with some of them after the committee was out, and they wanted us to charge more to the people who were mooring at the marina. And so I just think that they wanted, if someone was going to get a cut on what was being paid to DNR, they wanted to get something too. And it's totally understandable. But it's just, as you see, it's just hard to move a bill through the process when you're being opposed by both public agencies and the private sector. So, yes.
So the exemption for the port, is that set in stone? Is there a time that it expires? Can it be reviewed again so that the exemption no longer stands and then they pay?
I believe, off the top of my head, and I'm almost 90% sure, I'll have to look at it again, but I'm pretty sure that the exemption for the port districts, like the Port of Seattle, is set in stone. It's statutorily set. And so it's not just a matter of an agreement. It's actually a matter of something that is in statute. And so that's a little bit harder to change. And I don't think that anyone would want them to pay. I mean, we were looking for equal treatment. And actually, the port representative was actually supportive of our bill in committee, which was very nice.
Can I make it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know, I think one of the interesting things on this, and I really think it was DNR's opposition that really killed the bill, and it was a difficult budget year, but I grew up in Oak Harbor, and of course I live in Des Moines, and both these areas have in common is that they have issues around quality of life due to air noise and air pollution. And so, you know, for me, when we're talking, is it 75,000 for the city of Des Moines? Is that your lease amount? 106. So that's money that we should have be coming back to help our public, you know, marinas and things for our quality of life. And so I think we're all prepared to come back next year. I think we do need to figure out a different strategy around DNR, and we need to work on that because they really are pretty effective of slowing it down. But again, it seems odd that the port would have an exemption in these public marinas that are so impacted to not, so.
You know, if I could, I don't understand it fully, but what we heard when we were in Olympia from the Port of Seattle is that it's an exemption, but it's based on something that was paid quite some time ago, so that they had actually contributed something up front. So they gave something to pay for it, essentially. And I don't know exactly what that is.
Yeah, I remember that. The port representative brought that up, and it was something that they had traded away long ago. So they had traded something, and they had gotten this. Now, off the top of my head, I'm not remembering what it was, but it was many years ago. It was like I think he said it was in the 70s or 80s, but I wish I knew it off the top of my head what they would have traded. But I think it was a direct fiscal impact. It was actually cash from some revenue stream. So that's what I remember. I wish I had more information on that. But like I said, you know, private sector's opposed, DNR's opposed, makes it very difficult to move forward. But it was unanimously passed out of the policy committee. A lot of the members I met with were very sympathetic to the concerns of Des Moines, and they saw it as a fairness issue too. They believed that despite the fiscal impact, that it would be good policy. And so that was nice, but ultimately it was referred to the Appropriations Committee, and it didn't get a hearing or proceed out of that because of fiscal concerns. So the brighter spot is the capital budget request. And so we put in for that money, and we were granted a big chunk of it. So we put in for $6 million, and we got $2 million, which is a huge victory, actually, because a lot of these cities and other entities that apply for capital budget funds make applications, and they don't get anything. So we were really blessed to get this money. And we had met a number of key criteria for getting the money, namely, you know, it fulfills a great purpose that helps expand and keep access to Puget Sound available for people in the region. And the city had already dumped just a ton of money into keeping up the marina, and there was a ton more money to go. So if we're able to show to the state and to lawmakers that we have skin in the game, that definitely helps us get money for the capital budget. And going forward, it'd be nice to do more capital budget requests to help fund some of the great work we're doing in the marina. Let's see, anything else here? No. So we got the money in first in the Senate budget, and then for some reason it wasn't there in the House budget. But ultimately, during reconciliation, because of the work of our delegation, we did get money included in the House budget, in the reconciled budget. So it also included some other projects in the Des Moines area, which I've highlighted there, and also the Highline College one, which I left out. But we'll go into why the check hasn't come in the mail yet. And so you guys who follow the news have realized there was a big impasse, and negotiations kind of broke down at the last minute when they were going to pass the capital budget. Over the Hearst water rights decision. It's a decision that impacts a lot of legislators who live in eastern Washington and represent those areas, less so for us on the western side of the state. And they really wanted to see a fix that would basically have overturned the Supreme Court decision. And so negotiations broke down, sessions adjourned without a capital budget, and we'll hopefully get the same money in the budget next year. Hopefully the budget itself will not change enough, and our project will continue to be included there. It's just a question of when they pass it, hopefully. And so the 60% majority is needed to pass the capital budget. And so, depending on what the results of the special election is, it really won't change the dynamic in terms of the capital budget as much. At least that's some people's take, to give either party 60% control to pass the capital budget. So that's challenging. Let's see. So just a few miscellaneous legislative items. There was a PRA reform bill, which was great. It helps cities a lot. There are a group of people, small but growing, who are using the Public Records Act as a tool to get money out of cities from lawsuits by just sending in these enormous, impossible to fulfill public record requests and then suing the city when someone doesn't provide a note taken on a Post-it, silly stuff usually. And so this bill was the one that everyone was able to agree on, and so it allows the city to charge more for records that were gathered digitally. Cities could previously already charge for paper records, but increasingly, as you guys know, the trend is digital. So this gives cities a great new tool to sort of challenge the requesters and say, you're able to get the records, sure, nothing's changing on that area, but you have to give us 20, 40, 60 bucks to pay for the amount of staff time that you're using to fulfill the request. And that, I think, will deter a lot of these people who are requesting enormous records, just hoping to get a good lawsuit against the city. There was no hit to shared revenue. That was something that AWC was really concerned about. Senator Rivers had originally told them that on the Republican side that they were going to be pretty awestruck by the amount of money that was going to be cut from the city budget. But when they actually came out with their plan, it really didn't include any major hits to shared revenue. So that was a big win, something we always have to look out for. You know, we don't want to lose any revenue and then have to backfill it some other way or cut services. And then, as Representative Orwell mentioned, we did get funding in the operating budget for an ultrafine particulate study, which is great. And I saw the testimony on the House side. It was pretty gut-wrenching what some of the people had to say in front of the committee, and pretty heartfelt stuff too. So it's good that money was able to come through. And then there's several issues on the horizon, shared revenue cuts being one of them, but also the latest IMAN initiative, Initiative 947, that is being called $30 car tabs. It would be a big fiscal hit to the city of Des Moines because we have a $40 person transportation benefit district. And so because it would set the tab fees at $30, we would lose quite a bit of money. And it would really hurt our ability to fund transportation projects here. So that is something to look out for. Now, it hasn't gathered major steam yet, but it's something to always be looking out for. It's certainly generating a lot of media buzz right now. So, and it would also cut some of the projects that had been voter approved in ST3. So, so with that, I will take any questions that anyone has for me.
No questions.
Okay, great.
Wow, that means you were very thorough.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank you both, and
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Mayor, can I just say something really quick? I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Representative Orwell. In the 5 years that I've been in Des Moines, there's one legislator that's consistent with law enforcement issues. And I think there's consensus among South King County chiefs specifically on Representative Orwell's knowledge of the issues that concern us, what's impacting us, but also moving ahead with results. She mentioned the rape reform kit. I've talked to her about that years ago. That is significant for us because it's impact and help for victims. Brings justice to people who have suffered and helps us to get our cases through faster. And it was a significant victory for the state on public health and mental health issues, the suicide bill, on suicide issues. There's been so much that we've been able to get done with regards to gang violence reduction in general, that much of what we're doing in the future is because of what has been paved. So thank you very much, and I mean that from the heart.
thank you, Chief. I think many of us echo. Tina, you've been great. Thank you. You are definitely a partner of this city. Okay, this takes us forward to our presentation on emergency management. And we'll have our city manager, Michael Mathias, give the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. So last week, a number of city staff and the mayor traveled back to Emmitsburg, Maryland, to the National Emergency Management Institute, also home to the National Fire Academy, for training in emergency management. We did it under kind of the the context of the Greater Federal Way Emergency Management program. And so what it involved was a number of agencies, South King Fire and Rescue, City of Federal Way, Lake Haven, Water and Sewer District, St. Francis Hospital, City of Des Moines, and I'm probably missing a few, but at any rate, so it was kind of a comprehensive training focusing on recovery, which I'll come to in a minute. But I just want to say that, you know, as a city manager, one of the joys that I get from my role here is when I see kind of the sheer excitement and joy expressed by some of our employees or all of our employees, depending on the situation. So I just want to show you an example of one of those. This is the National Academy. And this is us.
Only one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm showing this because I was assured by Mike that we'd be friends after the meeting. So thank you for but I think that one of the things that this picture actually is representative of just an amazing group of people having a great time, learning a lot, sharing, enjoying each other's company throughout the day and evening. And I was really also proud of everyone kind of committing to a 9:30 lights out. No. No, that didn't quite happen. So at any rate, but you know, it's a great team effort. So we're gonna, and you'll see the examples of some of that teamwork as we go through this. So the phases of emergency management essentially have to do with response, which is typically your first responders, your fire, police, medical, addressing kind of the acute, immediate needs depending on the type of incident. The second phase, and they're not distinct, they run over, but typically is called recovery. And recovery is the situation where you start to evaluate your infrastructure, what improvements you can make to improve infrastructure, or how you can kind of preserve, enhance, whatever you need to do with the infrastructure. You start looking at issues of past the acute phase, you look at building safety. Your building official plays a critical role between those two, between the first response, safety of structures, and then the recovery in terms of assessing what types of things need to be done. And the third level is long-term recovery, where you start to reestablish your development patterns and what your new growth patterns will look like, and basically take stock of what's left of your city and what you need to do to go forward. So those are three kind of distinct phases. This particular training focused on recovery. So we had our first responders in the room, South King Fire and Rescue, the hospital, the police departments, but it focused a lot on what happens with the recovery phases associated with building, inspections, rebuilding, infrastructure, all of that. So the process was 4 days of classes, including interactive lectures. I don't think anyone would disagree, although you're welcome to, that the quality of the instructors and the quality of the material that was provided to us was absolutely first rate. The A-team on all levels. And the other thing, we also did tabletop exercises, which were very interesting because the process was really interesting. They came up with a number of questions for us to address in a certain type of event. So all the people in the room would respond, and typically emergency management is done by different sort of operational and policy subsets of activity. There's the public information, there's a policy committee that sets the policy, there's the operations that implements it, there's planners that the planning committee looks at kind of what the planning dynamic needs to be. And so everybody was responding to those types of questions. Some of them were specific. And what the instructors then did was record all of the inputs, and then we would go out for like half an hour and come back, and they did was like hot wash, I think is what they called it, where they would show us what their impressions of our responses were and where we could learn from those. It was very interesting and helpful, I think. So it also coincided with Hurricane Harvey. And so we were able in real time to see the critiques of how the emergency management was being done down in Houston and look at how that would compare to like sort of a more ideal response if you had the resources and time. So you could kind of critique what was happening on the ground in Houston. You know, once again, it was pretty amazing to see that. I think at one point they brought about 150 people up to the Institute to go through 3-day training to return to Houston and be able to hit the ground with more knowledge as to their recovery process and response also. They addressed multiple subjects. I'm just going to give you a few of them. We looked at all hazards planning. We looked at planning concepts, jurisdictional planning structure, that's important to think about as we move into the later part of this presentation. Types of planning, looking at strategic, operational, tactical issues, looking at situational awareness and common operating picture, which is absolutely critical, that people involved in either response or recovery are looking at the same picture and they have the same concept of what's happening. The same information's flowing to them on the ground relative to inputs. So everybody's operating from sort of a common understanding. And they had 17 modules like this over the 4 days, these and others culminating in the tabletop exercises. The cooperation, collaboration, greater federal way. And we'll talk more about this, the regional dynamic, a little later. But the focus was on integrated emergency management, and that would apply across disciplines and across jurisdictions and across functions. And how does that all work? So what I'd like to do is just give everyone a chance to, who went back there, to comment, brief comments about what your experience was, things you think were valuable, whatever comments you'd like to make. But I just would like our guys, everybody in our team was active, engaged, providing inputs, and were really helpful. And we were complimented at the end of it by the instructors who thought that we're a pretty amazing crew. So that was just great to see. But I think in honor of the earlier picture, I'll start with Mike.
Thank you. Really, the first thing that comes to mind is the appreciation for the partnership that you all have formed with our south border, with Federal Way. That was extremely important to get us integrated with Federal Way and to have a seat at the table. And along those same lines, the relationships that we built within our own agency and being on a first-name basis with a lot of folks I don't normally work with was extremely important to know these people before a major event happens. Specific to the domain of law enforcement, I was there as a representative for the operations section, which is considered, I think they referred to it as the doers of the operation. And my role there was to take in a lot of the stuff they talked about, to share some of my experiences with police response and how we play into some of this stuff. I learned something very critical there, and that's how important the role is of our public information officers. A couple of us are PIOs, and it's fairly specific to law enforcement and the law enforcement domain. However, when it comes to a major incident, we need to create a little more depth. We need to create some more PIOs. So we started having these discussions, Chief Delgado and I, about training up some more of our folks to play that role, to get information out, whether it's through social media, through knocking on doors, communicating what our needs are, what our needs aren't, resource management, assisting with the volunteers and how they're needed. And lastly, really, these exercises took this standardized model, and you can tailor it to any event, whether it's an event or pre-planned events like we have the 4th of July or the parade, and we can take some of these the FEMA model and use that in some of our stuff that we do here. So that was really my takeaway, and I really just can't thank you enough. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So.
Great, Corey?
Corey Batterman, Community Service Officer at the Police Department. Couple big takeaways that I took in addition to some of the things that Commander Graddon talked about. The relationships, both with staff, and Mike touched on that, but also with these other partners. We were kind of for 4 days stuck on this campus, except for a couple little excursions that we made, and so it was nice. We had a lot of comments about they could have flown 4 instructors out and we could have done this training here, But the one big thing that we would have missed is being taken away from our lives, because I would have been to kids' football practice and everything else, and we wouldn't have had the time to sit and network, and there's a lot in networking. And so when a disaster strikes, knowing the people that you're working with is half the battle, and knowing the right person to call for the right resources. And so we made a lot of those connections at the south end of our city, but that also, we now need to do that at the north end of our city. We got a lot of other jurisdictions that we touch that we need to. So it reinforces, we need to make those connections, and so it gives us kind of some marching orders, I think, as we move forward, just to now do that on the other side with all of our other partners. And I think at times our eyes were pretty big, because there's a lot to this, and so people that maybe weren't as involved in emergency management before, I've had the luxury, or the curse, however you want to put it, to be involved in our planning process in the past, and so I feel like I had a little more exposure to this, but sitting there and talking about questions, and we're talking worst case scenario, major earthquake where it's region-wide disaster, and we don't have help coming from Seattle or Tacoma because they're impacted as well. So, it starts to be pretty daunting pretty quickly. And so I think we all, when you sit and really think about it, it gets kind of overwhelming. And so, just that dovetails into the last, and I think one of the most important things is the reinforcement of we need to get our community prepared. They need to take the initiative, and we need to get the message out to them that in a major disaster like a significant earthquake in the Puget Sound area, there isn't going to be resources, at your door in 24 hours. It's going to be several days, because we're going to be relying on resources from outside the area to come in, but roads probably aren't going to be cleared. And so it's going to take time for those resources to get here. And so that's a big thing that we need to, and we get the message out, but it just reinforces that our community needs prepared, because we aren't going to be able to take care of everyone, especially right after a major disaster. So appreciate the opportunity to go there, and it was a beautiful part of the country that I've never been to, but also a lot learned, and I think we have a lot of work to do too. So thanks.
Thanks, Corey. Brandon had a conflict, but was nonetheless, a significant contributor on our team. John?
Again, I'd like to echo what Mike and Corey have said about the camaraderie and getting to know the different people. I actually found out the emergency management guy from Franciscan is my neighbor. He lives about a block and a half away, so had to go to Maryland to meet him. But I kind of came into this not knowing what to expect, kind of deer in the headlights, kind of. But it was fantastic. We there were subjects that came up of that brought the importance that everything has to be thought out way ahead of time. From where are you going to put the debris? Where's the water stations going? Where's the volunteers reporting to? Just all this type of stuff, and you just sit back and go, that would just be utter chaos if it wasn't planned out. And it's going to be chaotic anyway, but it just realized that that's a huge part of what we need to take care of. So we're ready to go. And also in the public works end, we've got fuel. Our service center is, the operations center. Do we have enough fuel? Do we have enough equipment? All that type of stuff. So it was a huge learning experience, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Jamie?
My name is Jamie Weigand, and I'm here representing the building department. It was a fantastic opportunity. Emmitsburg, beautiful part of the country, and very grateful to have that opportunity to go back and network with my peers that I previously didn't know. So that was a great part of that for me. In regards to the building department, I learned a lot, of course. I'm kind of the new face here at the city. But I learned a lot in regards to recovery after a disaster. I mean, to inspect immediately after a disaster to inspect numerous structures, it's going to be nearly impossible. Excuse me, nearly impossible for our department. I mean, we've got 3 inspectors and a building official. So I learned that we will need to bring in outside help, which we can get from the WABO Association, which is the Washington Association of Building Officials, and they do have emergency inspectors to come and help with this type of situation. So we've got that resource kind of at hand to get outside help, and then to speed recovery as far as the building department. I learned that we've got to have a little flexibility. Well, I should say a lot of flexibility. We can't do the typical plan review, building review. Sometimes currently now we're at, I think, 4 to 6 weeks, maybe even longer for building reviews on residential houses. So we can't expect people to wait 4 to 6 weeks to apply for permits and have inspections on their homes. So there will be some flexibility. We'll have to coordinate with all the departments together, which is great. We were all there together, and that networking, I feel like, is going to really help us if something really happens in the future. But I was able to come up with some paperwork that we currently have in place that all of our inspectors use, and it's a way to quickly assess damage on a structure, and it's a rapid evaluation form that we fill out on every structure that has been compromised. And so we file this in our records. We've got paperwork to give to the homeowner or to the building owner. This is good information for them to take the next step and get help from FEMA and the process that they have to go through. And then there's some tags that we use to post houses, whether they're safe to occupy, restricted access, or unsafe. So it's great resources, and I feel like this activity really, just strengthened our city, really. And I think there's work to be done, but we've got a great start, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. So
Thanks.
yeah.
Okay, let's go to Scott.
I'm Scott Wilkins. I represent down at the marina, and I do want to thank Michael and Dan and Matt for allowing me to go. It was a great opportunity. The place was gorgeous. The speakers were fabulous, and it was a great networking opportunity. I too met John's friend, John, from the St. Francis thing, and I've already gotten 2 emails. One of them is next month. There's a class on volcanic. I got to read it. Sorry, because I had to write it down. Volcanic crisis awareness class, and also another class in September on maritime security. So just making that relationship with other people outside the organizations, and they're sending me things about things that could affect us and stuff. For the marina aspect of it and everything, it was great because I realized that everybody knows where the marina is, everybody. And so it's going to be a great place to set up any type of response for any emergency type things, water, food, different things, because everybody knows where that is. I can bring in stuff from roads, I can bring in stuff from the air, we can land helicopters, we can bring in barges from the water. We have all that opportunity, so it's just a great asset right there. One other thing too is I also have 30,000 gallons worth of fuel sitting down there, pump it out to our fire trucks, our police vehicles, our emergency, just city vehicles, get it up to the generators to make sure they're running in case of things like that. So there was so much more, but for the marine aspect of it, I was just grateful to go and meet everybody and be a part of it. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Some of Scott's input, especially around fueling, was critical in the response and recovery portion. And so probably one of the most important aspects of recovery is getting paid.
I had one more thing, and I'm
Please.
sorry. I forgot. I'm one of these water nerds, so as one of our tabletop exercises was a possible tsunami. So I checked that data, that tsunami, I get on my phone and I look at tide charts. And if that was to come in during what time of day that was, we have tides of over 13 feet on that day. So just a large influx of water or a big wave or whatever. I went down there this evening at 10 to 7, measured the pilings with an 11-foot 8 tide. I had 32 inches of piling left. So think of a 13-foot tide, how high that's going to be. And if you get in, our docks are going to float off the pilings. And it's just an eye-opener to that type of situation, what could happen. So.
Yeah, thank you. But as I said, one other aspect of recovery is making sure you get paid. So that brought our finance director with us. Would you care to comment?
Yeah, it was, ditto to all the other comments that have already been made. But it is just eye-opening, the extent of the devastation that would occur and all that it would take to try and put Humpty Dumpty back together again is one of the analogies they used. And again, I think one of the important lessons to take away is it's not the finance department that's going to be getting the reimbursement. It's going to take the whole team and awareness throughout the city about the collecting of the information. But it was more than even just, how do we get paid, but just the concepts about, what you're going to have to do under contracting, what contractors are going to be available. Can we get contracts set up ahead of time? So a lot of the procurement conversation was there. And again, just emphasis that this is a citywide operational and everybody's involved in getting paid. The other is, again, an eye-opener is, okay, what do we do if we have power? What if we don't have power? How do you keep track of everything if you don't have power? So I think the class was really excellent in raising questions. Again, the city's got a good start, but I think it really helped outline more of the issues. And again, this just is obviously the beginning of the process, and look forward to working with the team to fill in some of those blanks and see how this process evolves.
Thank you, Matt. Or Mayor? Should I say?
At some points, I knew we'd done some planning, and I knew we had made progress. What I got from these incredible instructors, that, they when they read off their credentials, they had been collectively through most of the major events in the past 20 years, and all the things that they learned to bring forward. And I'll go through a little bit of it just to kind of let you know the depth of thinking that we have to go to. But, for example, we have it when you have an event, your first responders, you have your initial response. But when do you start considering recovery? And what they'll tell you is you start considering recovery right away. We do really well at responding, but as a nation, but recovery is a big challenge. And I felt really fortunate to be part where that was our focus. There are things like, water. There's potable water or water that comes, you can put in these big drums, and that has a different standard than if you're handing out bottles of water. Food. We take food quality for granted, but we have to figure out how to communicate to people that your food might not be good anymore, or what to look for, how to tell things. Shelter, we always think we'd open up emergency shelters and we'd use schools and things like that, but at some point you have to go back to normalcy. So if your schools are occupied with all these people that are being sheltered, you have a challenge. How do you handle that? And how do you close a shelter once you open it? Because remember, some of these folks that are in the shelter didn't have a home to begin with. We all think that, everybody would just go here, but some of them didn't have a home to begin with. And then there are those people who had a home that don't have a home to go back to. So how do you equip your shelters with the right people to help people figure out what they need to do and work through the process. And, you know, it's the depth of understanding that they had, that they kept bringing us to. Donations. You have to have donation collection stations, because the point that they used is, look, Grandma's muumuu's been sitting in the closet for 25 years. She doesn't wear it, and neither's anybody else. So how do you sort out the usable clothing from the non-usable clothing, and then what do you do with it? And what organizations have experience with that, and what organizations, you know, that could help you out? When you look at a volunteer base, everybody will pitch in and want to help, but you have to vet your volunteers in advance. If you have volunteers working in the schools, for example, they're vetted by the Washington State Patrol. Well, you can't just take somebody who says, hey, I want to go do this and I want to go work with kids or whatever, and not have any idea of their background. You have to vet them and train them ahead of time. You know, the concept of, well, what, you know, FEMA's going to take care of me. And the question was asked by one of the folks from FEMA. Do you think, how much do you think FEMA will pay? FEMA pays $30,000. They're not going to rebuild your house. But understanding the role of FEMA and what they do, understanding what insurance will do, understanding how to do things appropriately, and what has to go all the way up to the state level so you can get the appropriate government support, and where it has to be requested from, and what processes are necessary to make sure that the paperwork will get through and get paid. That's tricky. I mean, there's a process. It's laid out. You have to know what it is, and you have to do it right. Following Danielle is interesting, because we had a question. If you've been watching any of the current events out there, they talk about how much money FEMA's going through in a week. And the first question came up was, well, do you have the right reserves? You know, you take a city like Des Moines, if you were spending $1 million a day, we couldn't possibly have those reserves. So where do you secure the funding so you can shore up making those payments until you can get government reimbursement? All this has to be worked out in advance. When we talk about networking, this wasn't a, hey, it's Mike, it's nice to meet you, I'm Matt. You know, this was, you need to know where your resources are and who's there, who are the players that you can call, what resources are available to what area, and how you get a hold of them. Because the reality is, you may not be able, there will be various communication channels that will be available and some won't. How do you bring families back together? Families have to talk about that. I think the emphasis really came down to, for me, is pre-planning. We have done some work, and regionally we're I would say reasonably far along. But now we are very well aware of what we don't and haven't had a chance yet to do. So this will be a priority. It has to be a priority. Because whether or not it's the simulation we had was a 7.2 earthquake 18 miles deep in Tacoma. Well, maybe it won't be an earthquake. But a lot of these things, if you figure them out, then any event becomes much more manageable. When you talk about law enforcement, a couple statements were made. You know, I'm going to pick up the phone and call 911 if somebody starts to loot my house. Really? That's going to be a challenge, because, and if you have interlocal agreements regionally, that may not work. You may have to have interlocal agreements with people and law enforcement and medical agencies and so forth outside of the region, well outside. And then you got to figure out how to get them in here. I mean, it's very complex. The good news is Des Moines is in a really good spot. To Scott's comments, what he's got going on down at the marina allows us to, we have added amounts of fuels, plus we can fuel those tanks from the water side if we need to, if the roads don't allow. We have, so I guess for the region, our marina and our waterfront access can do an awful lot. It's less convenient, but we can even do some things at Redondo. I think that's, you know, I could keep going. It was a real eye-opener. I will say that the one thing that I really did appreciate was we started at 8 o'clock in the morning, but we started breakfast. Most people were dragging ourselves in there somewhere around 6:30, 7 o'clock. Then we'd get over at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that day, it was think tank all day long. The instructors had a great sense of humor about them, and each one had a different way to deliver, but they kept your attention all day long. And we'd go through the exercises and so forth, and then at 4 o'clock you're released, and you're so filled with information, all you do is talk. And a lot of these conversations went till, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And then people are getting back up, heading right back over to pick up and do it all over again. It was for me, it was life-changing. I really, I thought I knew a lot, and I now know what I truly didn't know, and I have a new commitment here.
Great. Thank you. George?
Thank you, Michael. A lot of what I wanted to say was covered by the team of great leaders. One of the things I was interested in seeing what was the impact that this training and this opportunity would have on participants from our city. And you always wonder, did we bring the right people, which we did? Could we have brought more? We could have, kind of. But the folks from Des Moines, every single one of them, represented so well. We really, as Michael alluded to initially, we really showed our colors. I think our community should be really proud of the team, of the work, the effort, and the motivation now to get things done, to make our community safer and to keep our citizens safe. One of the things for me that I was really contemplating while I was there was the various stages of evolution of human behavior for the first responders, the impact that a disaster will have for us, all of us, but also the community. When you're talking about an incident that's going to take quite a bit of time to get through, that's life-changing, and you have to understand that an incident of the magnitude that we studied is life-changing. We don't go back to normal. There's a new normal after that. We have to live with that. But it does something when we're talking the potential loss of life, wherein first responders, where not just first responders, our recovery folks are working through the process of bringing us back to some semblance of normal. It affects us mentally. We're thinking about our families. We're thinking about each other. We're thinking about our community. We're looking at, in some cases, very horrific scenes. Those are things that really got me thinking about preparations. I think when we think about a situation like that, an event such as that, we have to come to work prepared. You know, I started thinking about, and I spoke to Dan about this the other day, it's like, we have to come to work with a pack to survive for a week. I won't be able to order pizza for my folks. We have to bring our own food. We have to bring our own water. We have to be ready to exist here in response and recovery mode. We have to leave those things at home for our families to make sure they're safe. So much to think about. But interestingly enough, I got to sit next to Michael Matthias the whole time. And it was really interesting to hear him think ahead, think about coming out ahead. How do we, he's a planner, and it came out in this event. It was awesome to think about how we come out of this better. And during breaks, he'd be up talking to the appropriate people, the right instructors, about what funding streams, what's available to get us to that next level, to move ahead of just recovering, but coming out of this stronger. and I'm sure he'll get into it. But they locked onto that. A couple of instructors locked onto that, and I think we're going to be even better than people even know in the future because we did lock into that track, a very important track that will actually help us pre-disaster to come out ahead. But all in all, like I said, the talk amongst the participants on the way back was outstanding. It was the language of leaders talking about what we do next. Dan and I spoke after a meeting yesterday, and Dan's way ahead in the planning phase already on what we're going to do and how we might do it. But as he said, this isn't a one-man show, one-person show. This is a team. There's so much to do, and it could happen at any time, and we all have to be ready. So we're coming back ready to engage our peers and ready to engage our community and how to be better prepared and how to come out of this stronger. So that's my take.
Thanks, Chief. Dan?
Where to begin? You know, a lot's been said. I'm going to try not to repeat things that everybody has said so far. You know, we have done a lot of work locally here already for emergency preparedness. The chief and the colleagues at the police department, Corey, and many others have done a lot to prepare. But the thing that I left there with a hollow feeling in my stomach was even all of the work that we've already done, it is grossly insufficient for where we need to be. And you know, we've had a lot of localized kind of I don't want to call them disasters, but events over the last decade. You know, power outages for almost a week in some cases, the ice storm, windstorms, snow. Those are kind of things that we can kind of handle fairly well. The exercise that we were dealing with is something, and I kind of want to read it off. We kind of hinted at it a little bit, but we were practicing in a 7.2 magnitude earthquake that occurred Friday, November 24th. Region-wide power outages, possible aftershocks, liquefaction threats, tsunami threats, and then to pile on top, we have a forecast for severe winter weather, snow and ice accumulation of 10 inches or more in the area. So you think about that. So that's on a Friday. That's on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, where number one, our staff isn't here. Many of them are traveling, visiting families, so we're already short-staffed in the area. Just trying to think through all of that was very daunting. The other thing that was interesting to kind of observe is the dynamic nature of real significant disasters like this. And we saw it playing out at lunch on the TV screens from Houston, where they're dealing with the threat of a hurricane. And now we have 40, 50, 60 inches of rain happening and the flooding, and then explosions at a chemical plant, and then their water plant going offline. It just snowballs, and you can't even keep up with it. And so given the kind of dynamic nature that you see playing out in events like this, that situational awareness, the common operating picture, is just absolutely critical that people understand that, our employees understand that, so we can get the message to our staff, our responders, and the community, because if you don't have that common operating picture, people die. And that was kind of, you could see that playing out even in Houston. And so it's really imperative that our staff, our responders, trust what's coming out of the EOC, because the EOC, Emergency Operating Center, has that common operating picture. They can, they're getting all the information coming in, and a small incident command, they just have a little bit of information locally about what they're working on. And the example, I want to kind of just give an example of what that might look like. So you have a group of people that may be responding to trying to get people or fix a bridge or to do something in one area. And so they're calling for equipment from the EOC to come and help with that. But the EOC is saying, no, you've got to get out of the area because the levee, we're letting the water out because the levee's going to break. You got a 13-foot high wall of water coming your way. Get out of there. Well, the people, that's kind of an example where EOC would know that and be able to get the information to the crew so they can, get out of there. So anyway, enough of that. A couple of other things that became really clear to me is the idea that we need to change the culture of how we do business here. We hire people with expertise in building inspection and plan review or engineering, and we have job descriptions that talk about what we want that person to do, and they go do that, and they're good at it. But we really need to hire emergency response staff. We need to train people as we go and make them be prepared, and so that there's an expectation of what we want from our staff resources when that event happens. And we practice it. And in the meantime, while we're waiting, hopefully for something that never happens, we have other things that you can do, like building inspection and plan review and engineering and things like that. So, but the idea is to change the culture of how people think about what they do for the citizens of our community. Staff coverage is a significant problem for us during an event. And George hit on it a little bit. And it kind of depends on when the event occurs. Does it occur when the staff is here during the work day, or does something happen when we're home in the evenings or on a holiday weekend, on a Thanksgiving weekend? How do you get people here to begin to respond and then recover from that? And so there's a lot of challenges with kind of getting those resources here, our staff back. If it happens while we're at work, our staff is terrified about our families, trying to think through, try to work while we're wondering what's going on with our families. So, we have to have a plan in place to allow people to get back and then change it out, so that the people that have to stay while that first group goes home to check, that there's a process in place for that. We talk about it, but I don't know that it's communicated very well to our staff. So it is just, employee preparedness, and that begins at home. Okay, Matt talked about that a little bit. Having resources at home for our families so that our families know what to do, that our neighbors of our employees will help us check in on our families, and our families know what to do, so we can trust in that and know that people will help our families so that we can be here to do the work we need to do. Those are things that we need to do a lot more preparedness for. George talked about food and water. The old, what was it you always would tell folks? How many days to be prepared? 3 days? Way insufficient. Now it's 10 days, I think, or maybe more. But just at 10 days, 3 meals a day for 150 employees here. That's 4,500 meals that we're telling people be prepared at home. How are we going to fuel the muscles out doing the work when there's no food resources to come in to fuel our workers? So how do you deal with 4,500 meals here and just turning that over time and the same with those are things we need to get better at. We have some, but there's a lot more to do. I could go on and on and on, but I'll stop right there for now.
Thanks, Dan. So I want to talk a little about what we learned. This was done in a regional context. I think that the driving force was probably South King Fire and Rescue. George was gracious enough to mention this at Emmitsburg. I think one of the driving force behind our participation in this and our interest in this process comes from Vic Pennington, who had, unfortunately was not able to attend the training. But it was jurisdictional relative to South King Fire and Rescue. So that's, your first responders primarily. They serve Federal Way, they serve the city of Des Moines. And so a number of partners associated with the fire district and with Federal Way participated. So those essentially were, as I said, South King Fire and Rescue, City of Federal Way. It was George and I sat together, and in front of us was Mayor Farrell from Federal Way and Mayor Pina from Des Moines, and that was an interesting dynamic. And it was great that they were there, and I think it showed commitment on the part of both cities. Lake Haven Water and Sewer District, Federal Way School District was there, St. Francis Hospital, Federal Way Community Emergency Response Team, and I'm pleased to say that Barb here is a member of that in the front row there. Had traveled back to Emmitsburg and is a resident of Des Moines. So we appreciated your participation there. Federal Way Amateur Radio, City of Federal Way, the Police Department. And so those were our partners in this particular training. So what did we learn? Well, we learned something very important, okay, is that, what was that? What we learned was that that's only a part of the picture. And that was a surprising lesson. But, we come to realize that Des Moines is not sort of the adjunct to Federal Way or the small city compared to the big city, but we have our own dynamic. And we're in the emergency management, I would just call it the fulcrum or the middle of the barbell or any way you want to describe it. That what we did in Emmitsburg, and this was all unfolding as we're going through it, no one basically said this. It was kind of like, I think there was a group consciousness. We started to realize there's a much bigger picture here. And so, although we've addressed integration of emergency management to the south and with some of our agencies that serve the city, and I think, I think Dan's list is a long list. Like, even though we now have some integrated and coordinated response with those other agencies, there's huge amounts of gaps in our knowledge and our preparedness and our resources and all of that. That's only a part of it. The other part of it is, let's look north, okay? So this is a list of all, and it's probably not comprehensive, but this is a list of the other agencies and cities that we need to figure out how to relate to and how to integrate emergency management, not only with them, but as it relates to Federal Way, and how does the whole thing work together? Okay, so just let me walk through this. There's cities of SeaTac, Burien, and Normandy Park, Highline College, Highline School District, Highline Hospital in Burien, owned by CHI Franciscan, who was also the owner of St. Francis, so they were at this training from the Federal Way side of the equation. We've got Highline Hospital, an awesome emergency room and facility in Burien. SeaTac International Airport, Federal Aviation Administration, the new building, Port of Seattle, and King County Emergency Operations Center. Those were not addressed that week. And these are all critical that have got to be integrated.
I was just going to say, some of the obvious ones missing are Water District 54, Highline Water District, Midway Sewer, a number of them that have facilities within Des Moines.
Absolutely.
That are critical. Yeah.
Well, utilities, I think there needs to be more communication, for example, between Federal Way School District and Highline School District as to resources, shelters, all that kind of thing. So this is sort of a massive list, but the reality of a disaster is not going to limit itself to what's convenient. We're going to have to respond, and we're going to have relationships with all these different entities. We're also, this is sort of, okay. The other thing is that we're going to have to engage other partners, including, and this came up quite often back there, private sector businesses, all of the entities and companies existing at the business park, for example, others, nonprofits and community organizations. One of the things that they talked about that Matt described was you get volunteers, okay? We're not in a position in an EOC to start responding to volunteers. We need those vetted by another agency, supervised, assigned, right? Accountability for what that looks like. Same with donations. Same with logistics. Okay, what's the spot where, you know, people can get water? How do they get to it? Maybe that's also the landing for the helipad where, okay, so then what does that happen relative to food and water and everything else? That may become something associated with a shelter. That may become a distribution point. I mean, there may be multiple demands on scarce resources and land in the event of an incident like we're describing. So I think what we came away with was the idea that, okay, this was awesome, but there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot we can't do yet, and there's a lot of planning, and there's just a lot of like cooperation that's got to happen regionally with our city and multiple number of other jurisdictions. So that brings us to next steps. We've got to expand our relationships and coordination with other agencies. And as Dan alluded to, or described rather, we have to integrate emergency management planning and preparation into our organizational culture. It's not something we do once. It's not something we do once in a while. It's something we do all the time with a consciousness of that we're prepared and ready to go at any given moment in the context of anything we're doing. And that's a cultural issue. That's an awareness issue. That's kind of like Dan's describing, you know, when we hire people or people that already work at the city, awareness of emergency management has got to be one of the most critical aspects of their job descriptions and their understanding of what their responsibilities are. It's an ongoing process. As I said, it must be valued and articulated consistently throughout the city organization. We have to continue to enhance our infrastructure, especially the bulkhead. And one of the things that was something I was interested as we went back there was to see if there was a FEMA consultant or someone, emergency management consultant, who, you know, deep government, who knows where the money exists for infrastructure improvements related to emergency management. We probably found the person we were looking for, and they'll be out here in October. It's an awesome person with access to all of this. Had been involved in the World Trade Center, is a mayor from upstate New York, county in upstate New York. Just a great guy. But that he can come and help give us both guidance on the bulkhead replacement and also on how do we address the prior discussion relative to next steps with other agencies. How do we go about this? What's his take on how we do this? Dan and I were at the port today talking about improvements to 216th so that we have a consistent transportation grid, improved infrastructure all the way literally down from Greenview Drive up to 24th that can get us to the cargo area of SeaTac Airport in the event of an incident with that. Provide some critical linkages. And I think I'll stop with that. They gave me the microphone. They didn't only get it once. But it was pretty incredible experience, and I'm really, really proud of everyone's efforts. And I think you can hear from the comments that our staff has made tonight, kind of the depth and understanding that they experienced and were able to relate. And that's literally the first step, and there are multiple steps to take. So with that, I'll stop.
Questions?
I have
Councilmember
comments.
Banks?
And one is that the passion with which you've all expressed the experience that you've undertaken, not only that, but the reality of what it all means. And it is overwhelming. Having gone through emergency management training and doing a lot of the 24/7 times, however many days I'm at the airport for snow, is just a little bit of it. What I saw missing in this next steps, and maybe it's all of it, is that you really have to pull your plan together. Mm-hmm. There has to be whatever that plan is for Des Moines. And not only that, you're reaching out to the others is that learning experience. But I have to say this, if I only say it once about the Port of Seattle. We train all the time. And so you've got that expertise and you can reach out, as the chief knows, to anyone there that can assist in just that basic putting it together plan. Because you're right. How do you change the culture here? It's not just that. How do you change the culture of the people in our community that don't even know half of what we do here anyway? Not to mention when an emergency happens and who to call, what to do. Do I know my neighbor is number one. And if I don't know my neighbor, I sure should. Okay, and then number two, what are you stocked up for? But not only that, what can you share? Because that's what's going to happen here. So not only do you have your private organizations, you have Lowe's, you have CMAR, you have Starbucks, you have Safeway, you have all those little things we drive by every day that we should reach out to and say, in an emergency, we need this assistance. Because everybody is going to be looking for those resources. On the logistics chair where I sit, who am I calling? I better know who I'm calling. It's important to know who you're calling. It's important to have a relationship with those smaller organizations. I don't care, 7-Eleven. Doesn't matter. You're going to need ice and water, et cetera, et cetera. Your fuel, exactly right. How are you going to replenish that fuel? We've got to have all of those relations, and it's huge. It's absolutely huge, but you can only do it one step at a time. And so you've kind of got your head around this. Now you know the people out there that have actually gone through this many, many, many times. So reach out to those.
Let me add just one comment. And I appreciate very much what you said. You're absolutely right. I think that establishing the relationships, determining what the interactions are going to be, are elements that need to be then generated into the plan itself. So, but
One opportunity that came out of this as well, you talked about practicing. Cities, we get caught up in all the things we do, and that's not one of the things that generally hits the radar with regular frequency, but hospitals, for example, they have to practice. I can see why the Port of Seattle has to practice. The good news is we got asked a number of questions. We don't have a hospital. We don't have a morgue. We don't have a lot of these things. But our folks from CHI Franciscan that do have a clinic here in Des Moines, and they are one of our, our local hospital, they were sitting right behind us. And they're saying, we have to practice. Let's talk about how we can partner and create an event, and we can start practice. So maybe we have the opportunity here to start practicing on a regular schedule, because there are people who have to, and this will keep our mindset there. It is about integrating it into what we do every day. You're absolutely right. And that's the beauty of this, because opportunities came forward. We need to leverage them and move forward with them.
So this is an amazing presentation and something that's been a long time in coming. It's needed to happen a long time ago. We've had good key staff who've worked on pieces of the puzzle, but never something as comprehensive in terms of being able to get the basic training necessary so that everybody's on the same playing field from a knowledge base in terms of key staff as to what comes next. From myself and my fellow council members' perspective, obviously things are going to take different forms. Some of it's financial, some of it is policy, some of it is, or a large chunk of it is operational, because the relationships outlast any of the rest of us. So will there be specific policy changes that are needed, budgetary considerations that get built into the budget? Are we going to start to see those things where you need council buy-off, approval, input, whatever it is that leads to the comprehensive plan coming together?
I mean, that's a great question. So the answer to the question is that on a couple of different levels. We did put aside some money in the budget for emergency management for 2018. But I think it was prior to the insight that there was more to life than and it's, with respect, the greater federal way. There's more to that picture. One thing we didn't mention here, so driving back to the airport, Dan and I had a very interesting conversation, and he said, we have the perfect person on staff to pull this all together. And so I said, okay, who is it? I mean, and he said, no, you think about it. And then he said, you'll figure it out by the time we get to the airport, which of course I was not able to do. And so basically, and I think he's still considering whether this is a wise move or not, but I would consider it very wise. But I think what we're going to do for the transitional nature of establishing the design and going about this process, Dan has volunteered to actually take that on as a task. So that, which is, I think, hugely significant on a number of levels. It has to come from senior management where there's leadership. It has to have an understanding of how the organization functions as a whole. It has to understand what resources exist, and I think his experience with public works and engineering and all of that can identify some of those basic infrastructure issues that we can address. Relationship with police is strong. That's great. First responders, same with the fire district. So I think the answer to your question is probably two levels. Yes, there will be some financial implications of doing this. We'll come to council with those requests. There may be some policy considerations for council, but typically in emergency management, there's a separate policy committee that is not the council, but is associated with the emergency operations process. In the instance of this practice back in Emmitsburg, that policy committee involved the chief, Mayor Pina, myself, Mayor Farrell, and a number of other people, some of the leadership in the fire district. So they would be establishing policy for an event. Then there would be the Emergency Operations Center that would be kind of doing the large operational context of what's happening, incident commander. So policies related to our role in emergency management would come to council. Policies for events would not.
Okay, so if I was drawing a distinction, then you're talking about the immediate response as opposed to the recovery. Because I would think from the recovery standpoint, there may be policies that you need waived in order to expedite things. There may be things that you need done. You understand what I'm saying?
No, let me, thank you, because this is what I was saying at that time, I think, was along the lines of there's a couple of things. You're absolutely right, and it's not like distinct, like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. It's all, okay. So the issue with the long-term recovery, which I brought up in the discussion, was that when you look at long-term recovery, that's your opportunity to look at your economic development and your development patterns, because if things are destroyed, you rebuild based on where you'd like to go. It's an opportunity, tragic opportunity, but it exists, and you've got to take advantage of that. At the point you get to that, allocation of resources for infrastructure, economic development, all those other things, those are policy questions that would come before your elected officials. Is it appropriate to invest this money in this dynamic after you're past the acute phase? So there's absolutely a role in that. And one of the things that they emphasized was, and also can't say anything without acknowledging Ray Gross for an incredible job. And we went out to dinner with Ray. It was very interesting, but he did great. But the thing is that one of the things they're talking about was what Jamie's saying, right? So how do inspections on buildings work? Are there things that need to get shortcutted? Are you in conflict with the International Building Code, or are there things you can deal with in an expedited manner? Are there deferrals where you could look at something over time rather than need that complete answer at the beginning? All those issues are part of this process, and those do involve, our electeds would need to weigh in on that, because there's also liability associated with those decisions. So, at any rate.
Well, if I'd like to add into that. So Michael made the comment, you want to rebuild where you'd like to go. And so what was emphasized is that if it's in your comp plan, that's what they'll fund. If it's not, then they'll just replace what you had, which might be deficient to begin with, okay? So you have to change your thinking when you put your policies together to do that. There will be a policy committee that will be, that will have to react if there were an event. And there are some things that would be difficult, like do you put in a curfew? 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 Do you put in a curfew To the best of my knowledge, I don't think we have a policy on that right now. So it's not something we normally have to deal with or would think we'd have to deal with. So some of those might be done at the time. There are other things that we may have to think about. And this is back to the concept of changing the culture. When we look at, how long, for example, someone could keep a motorhome on their property, it's a little different if it's an emergency situation. So do we have a policy that covers everything because it's just this emergency? Or do you start dealing with it throughout all your policies, and that's part of the thought process? When we put together our council goals in the fall, we help to guide the direction of, at least the next year and years after that, there will be, I hope, there definitely will be some support from at least my end to do something around it, to move the emergency planning effort forward and put it into culture. Not something we've had a lot of discussion about because, at least in my experience with the city, it's been, well, we'll look to our police chief because it was allocated to that individual. And the reality is, what also I think comes out of this is, just like when we look at our new law enforcement plan, how it's all of the city, has some piece into that as to how it gets done and how it can be effective. This is the same thing. So it's not any one, Dan, I really do appreciate the fact that you had the wisdom to go, I recognize this. And based on the things that you said, I know your heart's there. Your head's probably telling you, boy, I wish my mouth wouldn't. but I again, it's the team that will work with you to get this done. Yeah. And so the answer to your question, I think, is yes, at a lot of different levels at a lot of different times, including when we do the budget. Councilmember Back.
Sure, not a question, just a comment. So thanks to all the staff that went. That was good that you took the time out of your personal lives to make this trip on the behalf of the city. So thanks to Mike, I like the comment you made about the need for accurate public information that needs to get out. That was good. Thanks to Corey, when you said we don't know what the scope of the disaster could be, how great it could be in the Puget Sound area. So who is the immediate neighbors, or how big of a region do we need to reach out to get help? That was a good point. Dan, you mentioned the need for a change in culture with our employees, but, and then Michael, you had just talked about the other partners we have, and I just want to mention one partner that wasn't mentioned, and that's our citizens that we've got that can step up to the plate and do amazing things when we least expect it. When I was watching the news reports of what happened in Houston, people were going out in their own boats and rafts rescuing other people, regardless of their race, regardless of their political beliefs, regardless if they were immigrant, if they had a Confederate flag, it didn't matter. The best of people can come up and can come out in a community in a disaster, and we do need to rely on our citizens. So public information's good, but we also need to realize government is not going to fix, if it's a major issue, major calamity, government's not going to solve it all. It's going to be good citizens in our community that can step up to the plate and really help us fill in the gaps where maybe we can't. So anyway.
Actually, you're right.
Points.
But I want to add a point to that, though. Our role is to help them prepare so they can prepare for themselves and take care of others as well.
Yep.
And that's what we have to figure out. And by the comment about taking care, changing the culture here, so our people here are prepared both at home and here at work, then when you go into this rotation of your command center's open and you've got some people staffed in there, and those command centers, after 16 hours, you can't keep the same people there. And so you've got to reflect, you've got to have a plan. Everybody has to know who their backup is. And that's our role, is to put this together. So the citizens we do very much have in mind, but we've got to figure out how to help, how to communicate out to them what they need to do so they can help and take care of others. One of the things I will say, and it's not a plug for King 5, but I think tonight it's either at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and if you didn't know about it, hopefully you'll catch it on demand if they do it. They are running a how to be prepared for a disaster program. Second time they've aired it. It was mentioned in our training as a really effective and well-done presentation. So I believe it starts at, I think it starts at 9 o'clock, I'm not sure. But anyway, we'll try and have you out of there by that time. Anyway, Michael, go ahead. All right, okay, I'm sorry, Councilmember Banks.
I mean, we only have 10 minutes, so you can let us out of here. Oh, anyway, I just wanted to comment on the community piece, our neighbors, our citizens in this community. And that is the most difficult thing, is the communication piece. And we've talked about it. We know we've got to shore it up. We've got to figure out how that happens. Each one of us could take a neighborhood. It still wouldn't make a difference. We don't have enough people that, can actually communicate out once we get this plan together, what's needed, what they should be aware of, and what they should be prepared for. So, in that, of course, in this plan is communication. It's not just your PIO, it's consistently, just like you're practicing emergency management, like we practice everything else when it comes to fire department, police department, planning, whatever you guys, do in terms of your day-to-day. So that's a huge factor. That's somebody's dedicated time. I'm not looking at you over there. It's more than just communication. It's got to really be, and I don't know how we do it. I mean, we've got reader boards we put out for fireworks. We've got, the marina issue. Maybe we do an emergency management when we get to that point. Sessions, where we use the community center or somewhere where they know once a month on this day, this is what we're going to talk about. Because, ignorance is bliss. And really, there is no time in this world today to be ignorant at all. You have to be fully aware.
Yeah, I kind of want to follow up on that. One of the things that I've been kind of thinking about, and it's interesting because when you look at the folks that were there at the table, not only from our city, but Federal Way and all the other agencies, one of the questions that was posed is, okay, if an event happened right now, what's going on back in your city? Are the people that are there trained to do this? And so you kind of think through all that. It's like, well, I think we'd do okay. But the issue is practice, and we've talked about that. And one of the things that is challenging as we go through this is oftentimes you get, you might send the department heads and the managers and the supervisors, but the reality is it's that next shift change that comes. You've got to have your number twos, your number threes, and fours, all the way down to throughout the entire organization that knows what they're doing, because everybody has a role to play. And so how do you do that? How do you practice that kind of thing when you, in our day-to-day routines? And so one of the things I'm trying to think how this would work, obviously, but, we just have a day, that we pick a day, and that's Emergency Preparedness Day at City Hall. And, we let the community know that, hey, when you come in today, our staff is doing this. But since you're here, here's some information about, and what do you do? Oh, you're a contractor. We might want to talk to you because we might need, just take those opportunities to engage people that come in. But our entire staff is at the activity center, working with other community partners and practicing a shift change and knowing how all of that's going to work. My final comment is, one other thing I wanted to mention that a takeaway, Ray and the Federal Way Task Force has been working on their plan and their group for about 10 years or maybe more. But you could see at the practice that we were doing, our tabletop exercise, the purpose for regular get-togethers to practice these things, because even that particular group, everything, we'll just send that to Celebration Park. So we had our shelters, we had our debris, we had our morgue, we had, everything was happening. So people had to think through, okay, that's not gonna work. The assumptions, the expectations between the different groups weren't lined up. And so that was a takeaway from this exercise was, okay, we gotta think differently about where we've sinned and where we set these different kinds of things up. So anyway, practice, you have to practice that to deal with it, so.
Yeah, just one last comment I want to make. This may be the best news of the whole event, was that the airfares, the training, the rooms where we stayed, the meals on the campus were all paid for by FEMA. So that was a huge level of commitment by the feds to make sure that this happens locally.
My last comment, which is to finance, related to FEMA. When we had the earthquake at, here, I don't even know when it was, the 2001, yeah. The lesson learned for us was what they require for documentation to get reimbursed, if you ever can get reimbursed. That is a huge, huge task. So it's just sort of good to be in front of that.
About your comment on lessons learned, one of the things I learned there is that it's not a lesson learned until you've applied it. It's actually a lesson observed. And that's one of the things that they made it. I mean, these guys, boy, they kept the wheels turning. Okay, well, Michael, does that conclude your presentation?
It does.
As you can see, it was significant, and I think we are beginning to, again, see a different change in the city of Des Moines that I couldn't be more proud of. So this puts us at the end of our agenda tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Emergency. So moved.
Motion made by Councilmember Kaplan, seconded by Councilmember Bangs. Our next regular council meeting will be next Thursday, September 14th, starting at 7 p.m. All those in favor of adjourning, please raise your right hand and say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.